Hey, everybody, welcome to Tabletop Voices. My name is James Introcaso. I am your host, and today I have an amazing guest. Richard, please tell the people who you are and what you are working on or have worked on in the world of tabletop role-playing games.
All right. So I am Richard Kreutz-Landy. I am currently working on a Powered by the Apocalypse game called Descent into Midnight with Rich Howard and Taylor LaBreche and Brendan Leon Gambetta. Basically, you get to play sentient sea creatures on an alien world, possibly in a universe where human beings have never existed. They share a psionic connection to each other. So if you're familiar with games like Headspace or things like that, where they're connected to each other, it's great because you don't have to worry about metagaming because everybody is connected and everybody knows exactly what's going on. And you basically are fighting this existential corruption that is like coming into your aquatic world, and coming together and seeing how like the choices that you have to make affect you and the people around you, your emotional state. Like it's very kind of story and emotion driven, rather than some of the crunchier stuff that you might see in other games.
That's awesome. And we are going to do a super deep dive into Descent into Midnight, no pun intended. And if you have questions about Descent into Midnight or anything else for Richard, feel free to drop them in the Twitch chat, and I will make sure that those questions are asked. But in the meantime, Richard, take me all the way back, okay? So before Descent into Midnight was the apple of your eye, when did you first lay hands on a tabletop role-playing game? What were you playing, and what was sort of your position? Were you the player, the game master? How did it go?
So going back as far back as I can remember, my brother was playing D&D and Shadowrun with his friends. He was DMing. My brother's about, depending on the time of year, 8 or 9 years older than I am. So you can imagine, in high school, I was his, bratty little kid brother. And I have this distinct memory of, in the house where we grew up, there was this hallway, and my bedroom was about halfway down on the right. My parents' bedroom was all the way down on the left, and his bedroom was at the end of the hallway. And so I set up camp at the end of the hallway with some toys to look like I was just playing with some toys, but I was really sticking my ear against the door to listen to them play. And I have this memory of one of his friends opening the door to go grab some chips or something and nearly tripping over me and going, "Oh, okay." And like in elementary school, I got bused to a different part of the city. And one of the guys there actually did, it was 3 brothers. And so the oldest brother ran basically like freeform RPG storytelling kind of a deal. And so like those were sort of like my first exposure to it. And one of my favorite moments thinking about that was like, he wanted to run a Star Trek thing, and we were like, "Oh, cool." And so we decided that we were going to go to warp. Well, we kind of forgot that the inertial dampeners weren't working, and so we pancaked ourselves against the bridge of the ship. There was a lot of that kind of stuff, but it was a ton of fun. And then, high school, I think, is when I actually started playing, real RPGs or RPGs for real. And if I remember correctly, it was, it actually wasn't D&D, which was kind of surprising because I'd played so many of the CRPGs. It was DreamPod 9's Heavy Gear, which, if you're not familiar, basically it's not giant mecha, but it's large mecha. But for some reason, they go around on like roller skates, basically. So it's like this tactical mini game that I guess turned into an RPG, and the different like mecha robots have different movement modes, and one of them is basically roller skates. So you can imagine these giant robots running around on roller skates. And then I ended up playing, a lot of D&D 3.5, and then moved on to Pathfinder. And a couple of years ago, I finally discovered that there were games other than D20 games. I started listening to the RPG Academy, and through that network, started listening to other shows like She's a Super Geek, and like there was people talk about like having those epiphany moments, right? And for me, like one of those was realizing that the stuff that I had been doing on the bus with my friends when I was in elementary school was really in a lot of ways the same thing that I was doing at the table with Dungeons and Dragons. It was just a different rule set and a different emphasis. And like it was mind-blowing for me, because it was like, oh, this is still like role-playing. This is still tabletop role-playing. And that, disconnect that I'd had for years of thinking, oh, this is just like a thing that I did, instead of like going, oh no, this is something that can be like examined and thought about in a lot of the same ways, and viewed on kind of like a spectrum of like, crunch and narrative and all that kind of stuff, and seeing like just how much creativity and energy was going into that from like the indie community was like, oh, this is the thing, and it's legit. And if I want to like play a role-playing game with my friends, it doesn't always have to be something where there's a 300-page book, so that was a big thing for me,
And how did you, so you, I would say, are a big member of the indie RPG community and sort of the RPG community at large on Twitter, and interacting with this podcast community that you have found. How did you break into that? How did you become friends with all of these people that you are now designing a game with?
Okay. So I think the answer to that, I think, basically lies in the RPG Academy, right? I had gotten a job where my commute was a lot longer. Instead of being 15 minutes from home, it was 40 to 45 minutes from home. And with San Diego, like the traffic just keeps getting a little worse and a little worse each year. And my wife works for the library, and so I was getting a bunch of audiobooks on CD because they were free. And when I ran out of those, I was like, I need more content, and I'm really not that interested in listening to 300-year-old books in the public domain written or read by amateurs, which was really the only other option at that point, unless I wanted to pay for Audible. And so I started listening to podcasts. So I looked up D&D podcast, and there the RPG Academy was. So I started listening to them, and I think it was my first Acadicon where I started realizing that all these people I was talking to had a presence online, and they were all on Twitter. Everybody was on Twitter. I'd hear people talking on the podcast about, oh, hey, find me on Twitter. And so I said, okay, I guess I'll join up. So I got an account, and then that year I went to a Catacon, and I made sure to sign up for a game. All my games were run by people I had heard of on these shows. And then at each of the games, everybody exchanged their Twitter handles. And so I just started following people, and then, like commenting on cool stuff in different episodes that I'd heard. Rich Howard is amazing. But he likes to talk about, like, if you want to do a thing, participate wholeheartedly, and that will open a lot of doors. Like, if you are genuine and you just show up and do the thing and say, hey, this is what I have to offer, can I help? Or just like be positive and encouraging, just in like a general sense, like people will respond to that. if you hear something you like or find something you like tell other people about it, and it, as a creator myself now, which is a little weird to hear myself say, like when people find something that I have done and share that out to other people, like it feels great, right? And it gives me a sense that like, oh, this is a cool person, right? Who's like sharing stuff that I've done, like they care enough to do that. Because it's something that most of the time you just pass right over, right? You think, oh, that's neat, and then you move on with your life. But someone who takes the time to say, no, this is really cool, is someone that people want to know, right? And so for myself, like I just started talking to people online, and as all things that are worthwhile to do begin, I think Descent into Midnight started as a joke on Twitter. That I made after hearing a podcast. So it all loops back together. But like I made a dumb joke about Bro Sidon, right? I think it was Swallows of the South was doing like an off-season content thing, and they had a Monster Hearts playbook, or somebody was talking about that. And we were talking about mermaids. We were talking about like, yeah, some jacked mermaid, right? Bro Sidon. And this conversation got going, and we were talking about Story Brewers game, Alas for the Awful Sea, which is this like fantastic game. It's PBTA, and it like takes place in the Outer Hebrides, so in the British Isles, and it's like there's all this like political strife and family drama and everything, but like a lot of it has to do with sort of this like mystical ocean-y stuff too. And you talk about anything aquatic, and I'd say within about 24 hours, if you don't hear from Rich Howard about it, he's probably dead. And so like we started chatting about that, and all of a sudden this stuff that Rich had ideas about for years kind of came together with like a lot of the masks mechanics and sort of the things that he had seen that PBTA was able to do as far as like really embracing that narrative side of storytelling, and also like the emotional connections between characters, which sometimes you don't get with a lot of crunchier systems. And so like those were things that he was looking for, and he had this world kind of in his head. And then Taylor and myself and Brandon all kind of became involved in just kind of like, it was like a magnet,
Yeah, and I want to jump in now to Descent into Midnight, because this is your big project. Sure. I actually played it 11 months ago at a Catacon, which is a great convention that the RPG Academy puts on. It's only about 300 or so people, but there are a lot of podcasters there, and a lot of game designers go. So you get a chance to really check out the indie scene and meet some great people and have an awesome time, because everybody who goes is just an amazing, wonderful person. And you too could be an amazing, wonderful person if you go to a Catacon. But I digress. Descent into Midnight. So it's this game where you take on a sea creature. It's powered by the apocalypse. It is in an alien world. It is weird in the best possible sense of the word. It is really, really cool. And it seems like a concerted effort to make it seem like the ocean is just as strange as being on another planet. And I know you are on another planet in this game, but you're sort of drawing on our Earth ocean to build this ocean world, right? So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the idea behind the alienness of it all, and why you chose Powered by the Apocalypse. Because before this podcast, we were talking, you are a math guy. You love math. Powered by the Apocalypse, as we know, is not the crunchiest, mathiest system. So why choose to design Empowered by the Apocalypse 2? I know that's a lot I'm throwing at you. We can start with Alien and then move to the math if you want.
Okay. Sure. I think like here's the thing. Like, I grew up in San Diego. For all of my life, I have been maybe a half-hour drive to the ocean.
Mm.
And like many native San Diegans, I went, yeah, whatever, that's nice. You know, I don't surf, I don't snorkel, I don't do any of that fun stuff to take advantage of it. Although I've tried a little bit, but here's the thing, like, you know, it was kind of Rich's idea to have this world and all this stuff, and sort of he was sort of he's the creative lead, right? Like he's got the vision, and then we all sort of like come together to like tease out all the cool stuff from that and add our own bits to it. But you know, he's studied marine biology, and one thing that you realize super quickly if you start looking at like all the stuff in the ocean is it's flipping weird, man. You know, like if you have not, go check out, I think it's BBC, put out this series called Blue Planet and Blue Planet 2. And they're these documentaries. And if you've seen like the Planet Earth thing where the photography or the cinematography, whatever you want to call it, is just like next level. It is amazing. It's beautiful. But the things that they're featuring on here are just like they're out of this world, right? They're just so weird. And one of the things that, like, you know, if you're playing D&D, right, you're playing in a world that is, for most people, vaguely familiar, right? It is, oh, this is kind of Europe-y-ish, old-timey. There's probably going to be like some knights and armor and stuff. And yeah, maybe there'll be some like demons and stuff. Okay, right? Or orcs, which are basically like, you know, big nasty green people, whatever, right? Like, but there's a lot of like tropes and things that, like, if you've been around, you know, nerdy sci-fi fantasy stuff for a while, it's like you're used to that, right? It's sort of old hat. And it's also very humanocentric, I guess. It's like you're still playing a person. You're just a person in maybe with a different skin color or with horns or who's been around for 1,000 years, right? Like, but you're still playing very much like this is a human being, except whatever, right? And with Descent into Midnight, what we really want is, you know, two things, right? So we want to give players the opportunity to step into a character who doesn't have to be like a person with X, right? It's like, no, you can, like, you know, one of the things about the game is your species is totally up to you, right? You create that at the table. And so you can say, well, I feel like being a crab who's 200 meters wide, with tentacles, and oh yeah, and I can only see through the echo, the psychic, like, you know, echo of everything that's going on around me. And I go, okay. Right, like in playtesting, we've had characters who are like, I am the embodiment of emotion sort of floating around in a particular area. Okay. Right. And, you know, that's one of the reasons we like saying that, you know, this is a universe where maybe people don't exist. It's to give people a chance to like explore things like emotions and connections to the other characters without necessarily just kind of relying on those same tropes, right? And, you know, like one of the other things, like it's a very much, we want it to be a safe place for people to explore things like, what does gender mean to, you know, creature that's made up of a bunch of crystals, right? Like, what are their pronouns, right? And it gives you very much like a blank slate to say, hey, anything that you want to be the norm or just the way it is in this world, absolutely. You know, and it's been a lot of fun playing, you know, playtesting with folks from all sorts of different backgrounds and everything, to like, it seems like it really brings people in, because it's not like, hey, here's the some like old bad tropes that are, well, instead of being this color, well, you're an orc and you're green, stuff like that, which we really didn't want to deal with, I think, in that way. So there's that, right? We want people to be able to like come into the space and really just like experience the emotional connections between the characters without a lot of like baggage from previous experience or tropes or things like that. But the other thing we wanted to do is with, like I was saying, man, the ocean is really flippin' weird. Yeah, have you seen SpongeBob, right? There's that underwater lake, in SpongeBob. Okay, that's actually a thing. So like these minerals come up out of the vents out of the bottom of the ocean, right? And they're like the water is denser, right? So like just like how you can float like oil on top of water, when there's different densities, things separate, right? Well, that happens at the bottom of the ocean too. And so stuff will come out of the bottom of the ocean, these vents and everything, and it's got all this stuff in it, and that's denser, and so it like sinks to the bottom. And so you actually have these lakes that form. And then weird stuff will start to happen. Like there are these eels that will actually like go down into those lakes. But the problem is that there's so much like nasty toxic stuff in the water in these little mini lakes at the bottom of the ocean that if they stay in them too long, their nervous system starts to shut down.
Whoa.
And it's so toxic that like bacteria can't survive. And so if a corpse of some fish or something falls into it, it just stays there and doesn't decompose.
God.
All of these, like it is nuts. And there's so much stuff like that. Like even your everyday, like Flipper, right? Oh, okay. Flipper's just like a cool little, it's like a little dog, only as a dolphin, right? Well, not really. Like the way that, marine mammals can actually do their thing is like they've got way more like hemoglobin in their, I think it's hemoglobin, but it's like there's actually like a compound in their bloodstream that like gives them oxygen while they are down further. Like it, their bodies start shutting down like the outside, the outer parts of their bodies to like, make sure that they can keep doing stuff. They go into like low power mode. Like, the fact that mammals can dive so freaking deep is bonkers, right? And like even there's people, right, where I forget what organ it is, like they have a special adaptation, the genetic adaptation, to where they can withstand not being able to breathe for longer than other people, and like they make excellent divers. And it's just, there's all this amazing science that goes into that. And then there's just really pretty stuff too, right? Like if you see those documentaries about like the deep sea creatures, and you see all these things and they're like translucent and all this, or like there's these sharks that will live for hundreds of years, like the ones that live like really deep down at the bottom of the ocean, like they'll eat maybe like once a year. And they just move super, super slowly and super, super efficiently. And their senses are so hyped up that like, because if there is food that makes it that far to the bottom, they have to know about it. And so like their senses are all amped up. Sharks have an extra sense. Like they literally have one more sense than we do. They've got these little cells like along the sides of their body that like will measure like pressure and stuff. And then they've got like an electrostatic sense. It's phenomenal the amount of stuff that it's going on like in the ocean, like for me, half an hour away, right? And when you take that and then you say, okay, and now you've got a blank slate that, hey, this is an alien world where psionics are real. Don't worry about whether this is real science. People can come up with whatever they want to, and they can create whatever they like that's evocative for them. And also, somebody can say, oh, hey, I was reading this really weird article the other day about these creatures. And you know what? Usually the stuff that is real is weirder than the stuff that people make up, because there's just so much bizarre stuff going on in the ocean. And like when we were doing the early playtesting, probably for the first 10 games that I ran, I learned something new at every table because everybody had some weird ocean fact that I had never heard before. If you get the chance, go check out Get Hype, Mel and Ali's podcast, where Rich went on there and talked about the ocean. It's creepy and awesome and amazing. And that's the kind of stuff that like just happens in this game because people all have like that weird thing that they're afraid of in the ocean, or some weird thing they've heard about or seen. And you get to explore all that stuff with this game. It's awesome.
That's really, really cool. It is an amazing thing, and you have a great team put together, and you all clearly know a ton about the ocean, which is awesome. And Powered by the Apocalypse also helps, what you're doing. Powered by the Apocalypse often has the ability to sort of, determine the specifics about who you are and what you look like and that sort of thing within a mechanical structure. So that definitely explains part of why Powered by the Apocalypse. But as a fan of math, why Powered by the Apocalypse?
Okay. So I think, when we were first kicking around the idea with Rich, Rich has been writing aquatic supplements for D&D for a while now. The first playbook was initially called this Monk Templar, right? And I think Rich was actually talking about it on the Dim RPG Twitter account this week, I think, where it was sort of this like spiritual leader who could also was also a warrior and a healer and all these things. And I think he had said like he wasn't getting what he wanted from the mechanics of D&D and the setting of D&D for this class to really sort of get in touch with kind of that spiritual connection to other people and to the other characters. And I've played D&D for, I want to say, 15 plus years now, something like that. More if you count the computer RPGs. And I think there is a fair, I don't want to say criticism, but like there's a fair observation that like the connections between characters is not something that is mechanized in D&D and is not incentivized by the rule set in the same way that Powered by the Apocalypse games often will have the original has what Hex or I don't remember the name of it, but like the history it was the history stat with people, and Masks has influence, and so there's mechanics there that support sort of modeling and influencing the relationships between characters, and that was super important because when we were talking about what we wanted out of this game, we quickly figured out that it was very important for the characters to have a strong shared connection. So one of the features of the game is actually, all the characters have this psionic connection so they can, hear what people are saying nearby. They're experiencing that to some degree. They're feeling those emotions. But one of the things that they have is sort of like part of their power set of being these guardians, is a shared mental / psionic sanctuary that they can all sort of like inhabit. So if you've ever gone to like a yoga class or something like that, where you've done a shared visualization where, you kind of close your eyes and the person leading it will say, okay, you're in this space, and start talking about what it looks like. And everyone sort of pictures that in their head. Well, for these characters, they can do that and actually inhabit that space. And like, we knew that we wanted the players at the table to develop connections to each other, and for these characters to really have like a strong bond, socially and emotionally. Right out of the box, a lot of the newer Powered by the Apocalypse games have that built in, like, especially with Mask, there's influence of, and there's the team pool, which we're doing something similar-ish to that. And it's there are ways to do that in other systems and crunchier systems, but it's more work to get the same amount of connection, I guess.
It's not built in.
And yeah, and like it's very narrative driven, and because we didn't want to say, oh, there's the dolphin people and the crab people, and there's this species and this species, and let it be that. Like, because we wanted it to be very open-ended for people to come in at whatever their comfort level is. This really let us do that, because we can say what you look like, how big you are. That's up to you. It doesn't really matter, right? If something makes sense in the narrative based on how big you are or what you look like, then you can do that. And Powered by the Apocalypse very much like says, okay, if it makes sense in the story, do that. And if it comes up against a move, well, then that gets triggered and you deal with mechanics at that point.
So we have a question about that from viewer Blake Ryan Batman.
Oh, hey, Blake.
And yeah, I know. How's it going? He wants to know that, and we should mention that Blake has also designed a game in the Powered by the Apocalypse system called Conjure Hagalas. So from designer to designer, he wants to know, does your system function if player versus player sort of combat or conflict breaks out?
It can. We haven't had a lot of that in the playtests, and a lot of that is just because of the nature of the way it's set up, that you are this team who shares all the experiences. But interestingly, because you're also fighting this corruption, which can take many forms, and one of those forms is like emotional distortion, or like it can be like something that's really nasty and is messing with your head. You can have that. We haven't done a ton of playtesting around it, but a lot of the mechanics are sort of, like I said, aimed at dealing with the emotional states and the emotional consequences of things. There's, when something like that breaks out, when there is inter-party conflict that has escalated to something more than an argument, the meat usually of that is not, again, it isn't D&D. It isn't, oh, I'm going to swing my sword at you and try to hit you, or I'm going to pickpocket your special thing of whatever, right? Like it's sort of grounded in the emotional context of like, are you opening up to this person? How are you feeling isolated, right? So like Masks has their stats and conditions. We've got something similar to that, but instead of being, things like, let's say from Dungeon World, where it's strength and intelligence and dex and all that, you've got things like hope and community and drive. And then of course their counterparts, like, are the conditions. So things like feeling isolated or feeling despair or things like that. And so when it has broken out, it's worked pretty well, because most of the time it has been things like it's almost assumed that if there is a true threat of like, serious conflict within the party, most of the time it's going to be because of the corruption itself, and the mechanics are set up to deal with that corruption and the consequences of that corruption, if that makes sense.
Definitely.
Yeah, so it's dealing more with the emotional toll of things than whether or not you can do things, I guess. So the inter-party conflict thing hasn't been an issue so far. And we're really not that interested in the focus. Yeah, I mean, it's not really the focus of the game so much as to have that, because really if you had to describe the kinds of stories that we want to be told with the game, that we think will really sing with it, it would be creating worlds where there is this existential threat that is coming, and you play this team of guardians who are coming together to deal with that, and then working through the emotional consequences and sort of the toll of fighting that and the choices they've had to make to do that. And it's really about those people coming together and forming a really strong bond, and having the corruption be this sort of exterior thing that is trying to pull them apart, even if it seeps into the group and is trying to do it from inside. It's very much about like pushing that back together. And so PvP is a thing that might happen if the group is controlled, let's say, by the corruption. But again, it's very much dealing with the corruption as the source of it, rather than dealing with the person. And at Gen Con, we had a game where Rich was running it, and one of the bad guys for that session were basically another group of guardians who had been infected by the corruption. And so there are ways to present equivalent level threats, and sort of deal with conflict that way. And that actually worked really well. Because like a lot of Powered by the Apocalypse stuff, it's very narrative focused. And so if it makes sense in the narrative, you can do it. And the options for the results of the roll are typically open-ended enough that you can interpret them to work with the situation.
Definitely. Well, that was a great question, Blake. Thank you very much for asking it. An awesome answer, Richard. I think it revealed a lot about the design ethos of the game too, which was really cool. Sort of broadly, since we're getting close to the end here.
Oh, wow.
yeah, it's flying by. So sort of broadly, what hopes do you have for the future of the tabletop role-playing game industry, either for yourself or sort of for the community as a whole?
Sure.
What are your hopes?
I mean, for myself, like I am coming into the hobby, I think, from a place of privilege, right? Like I'm a cishet white dude who was doing fairly well for himself. Like, I do not have a lot of like the challenges that other people in the community are facing. And like I want to do what I can to like make it a place where everybody can come into the community and feel like, safe and welcome, and, put content out there that will make sure that like it's not just, that the face of role playing isn't just going to be people like me. You know what I mean? Like everybody is out there playing role playing games, right? But we want to make sure that like when people think of role playing games, they don't just think of white dudes, right? Totally. And like that there's also, like there's so much cool stuff happening in indie games. And like what I want is for someone like, coming into gaming to know that like, oh, these are all things that are valid. And, like I don't want someone else to have the experience that I did of going, oh, like not realizing that, hey, that stuff that I was doing as a little kid was actually like cool and valid and a thing. And like, I could have really been exploring that for years that I just didn't know,
Totally.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
it's a big question, but like, yeah, like I what I would love to see is to be able to have gaming be just a thing that people do and everyone does it. And it's just, like gardening, right? Like if you tell somebody, oh, I'm going home and I'm, like weeding the garden tonight, people go, okay, whatever, that's cool. That's the thing you do, like, sure, there's gardening shows on TV. Okay, cool. Like that's what I want, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that would be great too. I would love that as well. Someday. And
Yes.
that's also always what I say about Edition Wars too. We're like, hey, we can pick teams when our hobby is as big as the NFL. But
Yeah.
until then, we're all on the same team RPG, right?
Yeah.
Well, this has been a really great chat, Richard. If people want to find you on the internet, where should they go and what should they do?
Oh boy. So I live on Twitter. That is my big shameful secret. Although it's not really a secret because I post about it all the time on Twitter. But yeah, you can find me at r Kreutz-Landy. That's I think just like it says on the screen there. KREUTZLANDRY. I'm reachable on there pretty much all the time. I've got this awesome new job, so I don't actually check Twitter or any other social media during the day, which has been very good for my productivity and my mental health. Find me there. You can also look up Descent into Midnight at DIM RPG on Twitter. Find us there. We've got a Facebook page that doesn't see as much traffic, so we're not on there as much. Twitter is really absolutely the place to find me and Descent into Midnight. And then, of course, you can also hit the website. So www.descentintomidnight.com. I almost forgot that one.
Awesome. And well, I am on Twitter at James Introcaso. You can follow me there. Also, this is now a podcast you can subscribe to. You can get all the details at don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com. Thank you very much, Richard, for coming on. Thank you very much to Will and Sid for having the show happen. Yeah, this has been an awesome chat. Join us next week when my guest will be TK Johnson. So I'm very excited to have them on. It's going to be a great show. And Richard, once again, thanks for coming on. And everybody be kind to each other, and we'll see you next week.